Hey friends, it's Sam from DIY Huntress, and today I'm so excited to share a project with you that's a little different from what I usually share on my channel. I've been wanting to up my woodworking skills and learn some new joinery techniques, so this summer I went to woodworking school with two of my favorite people in the whole world, and I learned how to make this awesome little jewelry box. Even cooler, I hand cut those dovetails. I used a handsaw, you guys. Who am I? I can't wait to show you how I did this. Let's get started. If you've been following my channel, you'll know that my best friend Elisha came to visit me this summer to collaborate on a build in my shed shop. And since she traveled all the way to the East Coast, we decided that we wanted to learn some new techniques, and we took a road trip to visit our friend Erik in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania at his gigantic, beautiful workshop where he teaches woodworking classes. Now, Elisha and I both do a lot of woodworking builds using power tools on our channel. We decided that we wanted to challenge ourselves a little bit and learn some hand joinery techniques, so Erik decided that he was going to teach us how to make our very first hand-cut dovetail boxes. We're in woodworking school now.
That's it.
To get started, Erik gave us a really fast and loose lesson on how to cut dovetails, and he used really fancy words like
My dovetail. My shoulder.
and the scariest one,
Hand cut.
Me and chisels aren't friends.
like
They're
on
just-
Facebook when you can choose relationship status, and it's like
It's complicated.
It's complicated.
And after literally getting schooled by Erik, he decided it was time for us to get hands-on and try our own dovetail joints, so we grabbed some gear, milled up some lumber, and got started. Now, I'm going to walk you through how to make your own hand-cut dovetail boxes later in the process, but for now I just wanted to talk through the practice portion of this project because it was kind of frustrating, and I'm pretty positive I doubted every single one of my woodworking abilities throughout the entire time that I was practicing. But luckily, I had Elisha and Erik there to kind of coach me through the process, and eventually I was able to make something that kind of resembled a dovetail joint. But if we're keeping it really real here, the first time around was not really a success, and it kind of looked like a kindergartner cut the joints with a plastic knife. So I went back to the drawing board and I tried again on the other side of the wood. After about a full day in the workshop on day one, and after practicing a bit more, we were finally creating dovetail joints that we were proud of, and they were good enough to make Erik trust us enough to dig through his fancy lumber pile to choose really nice lumber for our future boxes. And as you can see, I chose what Erik would call a sexy piece of walnut for my hand-cut dovetail box. To get started, Erik and I began to mark out the shape of the box, and I really wanted to make a square box with continuous grain. And after marking out all of the pieces, I brought the larger walnut piece to the saw and cut it into smaller, more manageable pieces before then bringing it over to a jointer to flatten out both of the edges. This is my first time using a jointer, and I actually really liked it, and I kind of want one in my shop even though it doesn't fit. But anyway, enough of my fantasies about the tools I want in my workshop. I then brought the piece over to the table saw and cut it down to its final width, and then brought it over to the planer and planed it down to its final thickness. I then used the table saw and a sled to cut all of the pieces down to the final dimensions for the box, and then began to lay out my design. So I had this little pipe dream of being able to use this gorgeous continuous grain and have it wrap around the entire box, but spoiler alert, it didn't work out because I ended up doing something really dumb later in the process. We'll get there when we get there. But basically, to start, I had to mark the thickness of my piece on the top of the pieces that I was cutting the tails onto, and I used a gauge that was already preset by Erik to just mark the tails with a pencil because I'll be cutting these out with a handsaw. So when making a dovetail joint box, you want two of your pieces to have tails on both sides and the other two pieces to have pins on both sides. And since I'm starting with the tails, I just transferred the tails to the other piece so that both of the pieces looked exactly the same. I then marked the material that I wanted to cut away with small X's so I didn't make a mistake, and then used my handsaw to start defining and cutting the tails. So thank goodness for fast forward motion on video editing programs because this really did take forever, I'm not gonna lie. In a real life situation, if I were to be using dovetail joints on drawers or furniture, I'd probably use my scroll saw or my bandsaw and not hand cut them, but I really wanted to challenge myself while I had Erik there. After hacking away at both pieces, I decided to then work one piece at a time to help refine the dovetails, and to do this, I flipped each piece onto their side, transferred the thickness markings, and then used my handsaw to cut away at the shoulders. I then continued these same steps on all four sides of the two pieces that I was cutting until all I had left was to cut away the waist in between the two tails, and I did this using a handsaw. Clearly my handsaw skills are extremely amateur, so Erik taught me a little trick where you take a chisel with a mallet and you lightly tap on the chisel to just clean up any of the excess wood and make the joints look very pretty. I also made sure to use a chisel to clean up the shoulders as well, and this actually ended up being my favorite part of the entire project. It was kind of therapeutic. After cutting all of my tails, it was time to start the boards with the pins, so I transferred the tail design onto the end grain of the boards with the pins and then used a straight edge to have the lines follow all the way down to the thickness marking. I then placed little X's on the sections that I wanted to cut away and used my handsaw to begin following the lines that I made using the marking gauge. And once I was happy with my lines, I then used another small hacksaw to cut away the bulk of the material. Next, it was time to chisel away the excess and clean up the pieces with the pins the same exact way that I cleaned up the pieces with the tails. And to my genuine surprise, I ran a dry fit and things actually seemed to fit together, but there were still a couple of things that needed to be cleaned up, so I just spent some time using the chisels and making sure that everything looked beautiful. Oh my god, it's actually beautiful. While all of day 2 is pretty much spent cutting out all of the joints, day 3 was awesome because I finally got to assemble the box. And basically after running a dry fit and making sure that all of the pieces fit together nicely, I then brought each piece over to the router table and began to route small grooves in the top and the bottom of one side of each box because I'm going to be placing a lid and a bottom inside the box and I wanted them to be inset. Also, yet another reason why Erik's shop is so awesome is because he was actually able to really quickly set up a couple of guides so that this was foolproof and I couldn't mess it up. I then began sanding all of the grooves nice and flat, and as I did that, Erik cut all of the top and bottom lids at the bandsaw for us, handed them over, and then I sanded that down as well before installing them into the grooves and running a dry fit to make sure that everything was okay. Okay, so I'm not going to force this one in because I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to take it apart. That's what it's going to look like, and it's going to look great.
You got a pretty little box.
All right, let's get ready to glue it.
If there were 2 words on this day that triggered me, those 2 words were glue up. For some reason, the glue up was the most stressful part of this entire build. I don't know if it was the fact that like once you glue something up, it's permanent, or I knew that if I messed things up, I really couldn't fix it because I spent 2 days cutting dovetail joints. Whatever it was, I was just super stressed. But Erik helped me glue everything up. The dovetails and the pins fit perfectly together, and I waited for them to dry, distracted myself by serenading Elisha, and then after an hour or so, came back to the box and took all of the clamps off. At first I was excited, but then, you guys, then I noticed this. I'm so mad at myself because I didn't glue this up in the right order, and the whole point of choosing this piece was to have continuous grain going across the entire box. So, lesson learned, I guess, for next time. Let's finish sanding this thing up. So despite the fact that at this point I was kicking myself and I didn't glue it up in the right order, my dovetails still happened to fit together beautifully, which is great because that means I cut them consistently. The only issue was that there were a couple of little gaps here and there, so I just took some scrap walnut with some wood glue, filled those gaps, and then sanded them down really flat. I then brought the box over to the table saw where Erik and I set the depth of the blade at a tiny bit less than what the depth of the wood was, and then I ran the box over the blade to begin to form a lid. And since the blade didn't cut all the way through the box, I did have to cut away the excess using a handsaw. I then used a chisel to flatten the top of the box, and as I did that, Erik milled the inside liner pieces for the box, but you're going to have to hop over to his channel if you want to learn more about that. I then glued the liner pieces to the inside of the box and let everything dry. Next, I sanded the box to 400 grit, then wet the grain and sanded it again to 400 grit, and then it was time for finishing.
Finish time, baby.
Sexy, can I just put in my mouth? If you have ever oiled up a hardwood project or walnut or any type of work that you've been working on for a couple days, you will know how satisfying this part was. It is crazy how a little bit of oil just makes a project pop so beautifully. We really had so much fun finishing our projects together as a team, and they all turned out really cool, so please make sure to visit Elisha and Erik's channels to check out the boxes that they made over this weekend. So while this isn't the typical type of video or project I share on my channel, I had so much fun challenging myself and learning new hand-cut techniques at Erik's shop, and I could not wait to share this collaboration with you guys. And honestly, even though I was bummed about the continuous grain not working, it ended up looking really great in the end, and I'm really proud of myself for creating this box. I really do hope that you guys enjoyed going on this journey with me and learning a new technique. If you'd like to see more woodworking type projects in the future, please make sure to subscribe. But in the meantime, thank you guys so much for not only watching my videos, but for supporting this awesome side hustle that I have and allowing me the opportunity to collaborate with awesome makers. Until next time, friends, happy DIYing.